Well, you might like to turn to that passage that we read together if you're following in a Bible. Otherwise, just listen. You'll perhaps remember that the background to this passage was that Eli, a godly man, a godly priest, but a weak man, and he had two godless sons, Hophni and Phinehas, who didn't know the Lord, it says. And a result of them, the worship of the Lord in Israel was corrupted. You read about that in 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 24. Nay, my sons, for it is no good report that I hear of you, make the Lord's people to transgress. They were priests, and they were causing the Lord's people to transgress, to stray from the Lord. And it goes on as we carry on through the various earlier chapters, the sins of these young men in the priesthood, but not serving the purpose of priests. And so it was that Israel was defeated in battle by the Philistines. And here we see the first evidence of the Lord's displeasure in Israel. They're defeated by the Philistines. And in 1 Samuel chapter 4 and verse 3, we read this. And when the people were come into the camp, the elders of Israel said, Wherefore hath the Lord smitten us today before the Philistines? They were puzzled. How is it that the God of Israel has allowed us to be smitten by these heathen Philistines? It's a good question, but the answer that they then give in the second half of the verse is a bad answer. Let us fetch the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of Shiloh unto us, that when it cometh among us, it may save us out of the hand of our enemies. You see then Israel's regard for the ark. It was almost a magic token to them. Truly, it was the symbol of God's presence amongst them, but they saw it as more than that. They saw it as something which would give them power. They were bringing God against the Philistines. But it was only a box, a wooden box, covered in gold on the inside and the outside. Inside it were the 10 Commandments, the law, and that golden pot which contained a sample of the manna from when they went across the desert, and Aaron's rod that budded. On top of it was the mercy seat. And in a way that was a symbol. It was kept in the Holy of Holies, a place where only the high priest went once a year. That's how special it was. And God's presence was there between the cherubim. There were 2 cherubims hanging over the Ark of the Covenant in 1 Samuel 4 and verse 4. So the people sent to Shiloh that they might bring from thence the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of hosts, which dwelleth between the cherubim. These 2 cherubim, they bent over this mercy seat. And it was a symbol, no more than a symbol, but it was a symbol. There was the law down in the ark, but over it was the Lord's mercy seat. The mercy seat, as it were, between the law and the sinner who comes before Almighty God. A reminder that God acts in mercy. He doesn't just hit us with the law. He offers redemption. He stands between us and the law if we will have him. Someone has pointed out that the ark in a way is a bit like the communion, bread and wine. Only a symbol. We came to the Lord's table this morning. The bread is only bread. The wine is only wine. If you analyze it, you find no more than bread, no more than wine. But suppose that you had an ordeal tomorrow and you kept a bit of the bread from this morning's communion and a bit of the wine, and you took it with you as you faced this ordeal. Would it help? Well, of course it wouldn't. But that's the equivalent of what the children of Israel did as they sent for the ark. It was a symbol of the Lord's presence. And they thought that by bringing it, they would defeat the Philistines. And so Israel treated it like some magic charm that they could wheel out at their time of need. But it's interesting that the Philistines were aware of this awesome reputation that the ark had. If you read verses 5 to 8 of chapter 4, when the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all of Israel shouted with a great shout, so that the earth rang again. And when the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, "What meaneth the noise of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews?" And they understood that the ark of the Lord was come into the camp. And the Philistines were afraid, for they said, "God is come into the camp." And they said, "Woe unto us, for there hath not been such a thing heretofore." They were fearful. Such was the reputation of this ark. Symbol though it was and no more, nevertheless it had the reputation. But the Philistines had their own god. They had Dagon. In our passage tonight we've read about Dagon. Dagon, the top half of him was a man, and the bottom half was a fish. And in fact, King Sennacherib, you remember King Sennacherib, he had a palace. And there were carvings of Dagon all over the palace. And some of those carvings can be seen in the British Museum today. A man's top and a fish's lower parts. But all of this is as God is dealing with Israel. But when Dagon is faced with this ark, as we read in our passage, he falls down before him. He falls down before him. You see, the Philistines had concluded that Dagon was more powerful than the God of Israel. Well, he must be. We won the battle. We've conquered Israel. So you see, this is the background to the passage that we're going to look at today. God has an issue with Israel. The worship has been brought low. Eli and his sons, they've made a travesty of the offerings of the worship service. So he has an issue with Israel. But now that God has released that symbol of his presence into the hands of the Philistines to teach Israel a lesson, the Philistines, they believe that their own God, Dagon, is more powerful. So God has an issue with the Philistines too. So he's got an issue with both parties. That's the background as we come to our passage tonight. And as we look at these two chapters, what I want to try to draw out for us is how men react when God begins to deal with them. God is dealing with the Philistines because of their feeling that Dagon is better than Jehovah. God is dealing with Israel because of their triviality in worship. He's dealing with both of them. And what I want us to see is how men react when God begins to intervene in their lives. We all have these experiences providentially. This happens in your life. Something else happens in someone else's life. God knows of these things. He brings them to pass. He's doing things in our lives. How do we react when God begins to work in our lives? I have 4 headings. First of all, a fearful rejection. The Philistines, they didn't want anything of this God when God began to deal with them over their promotion of Dagon over Jehovah. And then secondly, a familiar welcome by the men of Beth Shemesh. Too familiar. Too familiar. You remember that saying, familiarity breeds contempt. well, their reaction was altogether too familiar. And then thirdly, a respectful but partial welcome by the men of Kirjath Jearim. Yes, they welcomed God much more respectfully than men of Beth Shemesh, but they wouldn't want him in all their lives. They wanted a little bit of freedom to do the sort of things that they liked. And then fourthly, and this will come as we carry on with the story next week, when they come to a wholehearted acceptance of God in all that he is, in all of their lives. And there is a measure of revival, the restoration of the ark to its rightful place. But that's, as I say, for next time. This time, first of all, a fearful rejection by the Philistines, and then a familiar welcome by the men of Beth Shemesh, and then a respectful but partial, grudging welcome by the men of Kirjath Jearim. So let's begin then. We begin with the Philistines. We've already said that the Philistines believed that Dagon was greater than Jehovah because they'd won this great victory. They defeated Israel. And they put him into the temple there in Ashdod. But they put him in an inferior position. Dagon was in the superior position. And the ark, which they saw as being Israel's God, even though it was only a symbol, but they'd put here the ark in an inferior position. And you remember how we read that the next day they find that Dagon is on his face before the ark. When they of Ashdod arose early in the morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face on the earth before the ark of the Lord. A posture of worship. What a surprise. It has never happened before. They put him back up, poor Dagon. And the next day, he's cast down again. Cast down again. Verse 4. And when they arose early in the morrow morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face upon the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold. Only the stump of Dagon was left to him. Now that would have been very significant to the Philistines, because that was the way that you showed that you had defeated your enemy. If you don't need to turn to it now, but if you read Judges chapters 7 and 8, when you get home, you'll see other examples where an enemy has his head cut off and his hands cut off, just to demonstrate that they have been fully defeated. So the Philistines, they come and they find Dagon clearly defeated. First day he was worshipping before the ark symbolically, and the second day they find him in that defeated posture. God didn't need a great army to defeat the Philistines. Look at verse 6. The hand of the Lord was heavy upon them of Ashdod, and he destroyed them and smote them with emerods, even Ashdod and the coasts thereabout. Emerods are thought to be hemorrhoids in our sort of medical dictionary. And so they sent the God of Israel away. In verse 7, verses 8 and 9, they sent him to Gath, and there in Gath, once again the emerods broke out, this attack, but now there are added mice. And it seems from what comes later in the passage that the mice were going into the harvest. We read that it was harvest time and destroying the harvest. So now there was emerods and there was the destruction by the mice of the harvest. And so verse 10 of chapter 5, they sent it on to the next place, to Ekron. And the people of Ekron, many of them die. And those who don't die have emerods. And again, we have the mice destroying everything in sight. And they've had enough. They've had enough of this. And they send for the priests and the diviners. What shall we do? This ark of Israel, this God of Israel, he's too much for us. You see, God is teaching these Philistines a lesson. Dagon is not the God that they thought he was. He's defeated, and they're coming to recognize that. And when they send for the priests and the diviners, it's very interesting, the advice that they're given. If you look at chapter 6 and verse 3, and they said, "If ye send away the ark of the God of Israel, and send it not empty, but in any wise return him a trespass offering," beginning to acknowledge that they've done something wrong, "a trespass offering, then ye shall be healed, and it shall be known to you why his hand was not removed from you." And they said, "What shall the trespass offering be?" And of course we read it was the golden emeralds and the images of the mice that they were to send as part of this trespass offering. But then it goes on. In verse 5 of chapter 6, "Wherefore you shall make images of your emeralds and the images of your mice that your land, and ye shall give glory to the God of Israel. Peradventure he will lighten his hand from off you, and from off your gods, and from off the land." Notice that. Peradventure he will lighten his hands off you, off your gods. Dagon clearly now seen to be in the inferior position. And from your land, the destruction being done by the mice. And then they ask another interesting question in verse 6. "Wherefore then do ye harden your hearts, as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts, when he had wrought wonderfully amongst them?" It's a good question. They wanted to get rid of this God of Israel. We can't stand what he's doing to us. Get rid of him. We don't want him. But he's actually challenging them. And they're hardening their hearts. And you know, there are so many who are like that today. God begins to intervene in a person's life. Things start to go wrong. And they don't want anything of God. It hardens their hearts against him. We don't want anything of a God. I'm my own man. I'm going to do it my way. I don't want God in my life. What a sad situation. They're fearful. They're fearful of the God of Israel. Get away. I don't want you. I wonder if any of us have been in that situation, or maybe we're even now in that situation. It seems that things are going wrong in our lives, but we won't have God. I don't want God in my life. Send him away. I don't want him. It's quite interesting how the ark is sent back. You remember it's sent back on 2 carts, drawn by 2 milch kine, that is, cows which are giving milk because they've just had calves. And these 2 milk kine, these 2 cows, they've never been harnessed to a cart before, and their offspring is locked up in the stable at home. Now, the natural thing for a cow that's feeding his calf is to go to the calf. So here was the test. Would they actually draw the cart? Never been trained with a cart before. Would they actually draw the cart and take it into the land of Israel? Or would they insist on going back and trying to feed their calves? It could be chaotic. And yet they just calmly set off. And comment is made in the passage that we read. Comment is made that that'll be a sign that this was of the Lord. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. And when the men of Beth Shemesh see the cart coming, they're harvesting. And they recognize immediately the load that's on that cart. Israel had lost the sense of the Lord's presence. They'd lost the ark. And there's no way they could get it back. They'd have to fight the Philistines to get it back. And they'd just been defeated. Many of their soldiers killed. If you look at the numbers, huge numbers killed. There's no way they could get it back. But here it was, coming on a cart. No one with it. Isn't God good? Isn't God good? Sending back the sense of his presence to an Israel that had offended him. Yet he's not turned his back. He's not abandoned them forever. He's orchestrated a situation where the ark comes back, the sense of his presence there amongst his people. I'm still here, he's saying. I'm still here for you. If you will only mend your ways. You remember it was their worship, the worship in Israel that had offended God. I'm still here. If you will only turn to me. So the ark comes back. Isn't God good? And I was thinking how similar that is to the free offer of salvation. The free offer of salvation to sinners. Anyone. Him that cometh to me, I will in no wise cast out. The words of Scripture. God freely offers himself to sinners. As that cart came, as it came bearing the ark, as I say again, only a symbol of his presence, but God sends it back to them. I'm here. If you'll only mend your ways, restore your worship, come back to me. What a glorious message. And in chapter 6 and verse 13, we read that the men of Beth Shemesh were overjoyed. And they of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. And they lifted up their eyes and saw the ark and rejoiced to see it. It was too good to be true. How else could they get it back? But God had delivered it back to them. Completely unlike the Philistines. The Philistines couldn't see the back of it soon enough. They wanted rid of it. They wanted rid of God. We don't want anything to do with this God. They were hardening their hearts against God. Oh, the people of Beth Shemesh, the Lord's presence is offered to us again, and they're thrilled. And they immediately make a burnt offering of the 2 cows and the cart. But their worship is too familiar. Look at verse 19 of chapter 6. And he smote, that is God, smote the men of Beth Shemesh, because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. Even he smote of the people 50,010 men. And the people lamented, because the Lord had smitten many of the people with great slaughter. They'd looked into the ark. We've said it's only a symbol. It's only a symbol. Inside there are the tables of the law, the 2 tables of the law, Aaron's rod, a sample of the manna. But it was the place that God used as a symbol of his presence. It was the place at the very center of the tabernacle, there in the Holy of Holies, place that the high priest dare only go once a year, and that not without blood offering to cleanse him from his own sin. The sense of the Lord's presence taken for granted. Taken for granted. Isn't that true today? Isn't there a familiarity in worship today? Hearing something about that this morning. Familiarity with the Lord in worship. Let me take you back to Exodus chapter 33. That amazing passage when Moses was facing a great ordeal. And this is what we read in verses 18 to 20. And he, that is Moses, said, I beseech thee, O Lord, show me thy glory. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before thee, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before thee, and will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. And he said, Thou canst see my face, thou canst not see my face, for there shall no man see me and live. And the Lord said, Behold, there is a place by me, and thou shalt stand upon a rock. And it shall come to pass, while my glory passes by, that I will put thee in a cleft of the rock, and will cover thee with my hand while I pass by. And I will take away mine hand, and thou shalt see my back parts, but my face shall not be seen. God is gracious. He unveils something of himself to us as poor sinners, but not everything. There is a mystery about God which is not revealed to us. It's not right for us to know about it. In 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 16 it says, Who only hath immortality, speaking of God, only he has immortality, dwelling in light, which is no man can approach, and to whom no man hath seen, nor can see. There is that about God that we cannot enter into. He graciously unveils enough of himself to us that we might worship him, that we might embrace him as our God and our Saviour. But there are mysteries that we dare not enter into. And these men of Beth Shemesh, the curiosity was let loose. And so they ended up under God's judgment. One of the things that theologians love to debate is election. Here's an area where there's mystery. In Romans chapter 9, we read this. Therefore hath he mercy on whom he will have mercy, whom he will he hardeneth. Thou wilt say then unto me, Why doth he find fault? For who hath resisted his will? You see what he's saying? If God chooses this man to salvation and not that one, why is God angry with a man who doesn't turn to him? It's God's decision. But you see the answer. Nay, but O man, who art thou that repliest against God? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it not, Why hast thou made me thus? Hath not the potter power over the clay of the lump to make one vessel to honor and another to dishonor? You see that there are those areas of God's being which are beyond human understanding. We're not to enter into these things. They're not for us. But the men of Beth Shemesh, they were presumptuous. And they entered in. They sought to enter in to the secrets of God. And folk do that today. They don't like the God of the Bible. And they say, well, look, what you've got to do is you've got to understand God. And then you've got to preach him in 21st century terms. In the modern jargon. We know that a loving God wouldn't send people to hell. No, you've got to emphasize the positive. Presumption, familiarity, the thought that I can enter into God's mind and calibrate him and re-express him, represent him in a better way. The men of Beth Shemesh were presumptuous with this symbol of God, this symbol of his presence. And then thirdly, we come to a respectful but partial welcome. Verse 21 of chapter 6. They sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kirjath-jearim, saying, The Philistines have brought again the ark of the Lord. Come ye down and fetch it up to you. They didn't want this God that they couldn't mold and make the sort of God they wanted. They welcomed him, but they wanted freedom to shape him and make him more acceptable. And so, not having that, they send him to Kirjath-jearim, to the next village on. They offered him to them. And chapter 7, verse 1, the men of Kirjath-jearim came and fetched the ark of the Lord and brought it into the house of Abinadab in the hill, and sanctified Eleazar his son to keep the ark of the Lord. And there's a suspicion from the name that this man Eleazar is a priest. You see, they're handling this ark as it's come back. They're handling it appropriately. They're handling it with respect. But as we shall see as we come to that chapter next week, they don't want all of God. They don't want him in all of their lives. It takes the best part of 20 years before they're willing to set aside their other interests, their other gods, their other goals, their other interests. So there we have three different responses. When God begins to deal with Philistines and with the Israelites, the Philistines, they don't want this God. They don't want this God. They can't get rid of him soon enough. He's doing things in their lives and they just want rid of him. They're hardening their hearts. They don't want to open up to this God. And then the men of Beth Shemesh, thrilled to see God, see the cart, this evidence of the presence of the Lord. But they want a God of their shaping, of their making, a God that they can mold. And God's not like that. And then we come to, thirdly, the men of Kirjath-jearim. And they will accept, they accept the ark as it is, God as he is, but not in all of my life. They want to keep part of their lives back. And it's not until next week that we find the people giving all of themselves to all of God as he is, as he reveals himself. Nothing added, nothing taken away. All of themselves given to all of God. Now I wonder where we stand in that spectrum. Those who harden their heart when things go wrong, don't want to know anything about God. Those who welcome God, but on their own terms. Or those who welcome God in certain parts of their lives, but not all of their lives. Or are we with those of next week? Those who welcome all of God as he is into all of their lives. And we'll see the blessing that comes to them when they do that next week.